29. Mountain's Roots. Knox piloted the Tumultian hovercraft deeper into the foothills, and Kip sat in the pilot's chair behind him, holding the small stuffed rabbit Gord had given her. A day under Maven's loving ministrations had meant she'd been cleaned within an inch of her life. Her curls pulled into 2 pigtails, one for each side of her head. Maven had even found her a fresh set of clothing, a practical, long-wearing pair of overalls with a woven top underneath. The long sleeves flared open and hung several inches past her elbow. The deep cherry color even highlighted the subtle blush returning to her skin. For all of that, it would take time to undo the damage from her time with the Tumultian commander. He glanced back at his small ward, alert and vigilant. Her probing gaze was far too deliberate for a child of her age. The pools of blood on the deck didn't give her much pause, but he caught her casting worried glances back toward Gord as Maven tended to him. He could only imagine what she'd experienced in her few short years, certainly more than her fair share of violence and tragedy. Her small face crumpled and lip quivered as Maven set a bone in Gord's arm, eliciting a groan from the big man. Distract her. Kip, how old are you? At the question, she dragged her eyes away from the scene behind them, and after a moment of thought held up 5 fingers, 2 on one hand and 3 on the other. He smiled at the incongruence. No words joined the display. Back to silence? He tried another question. What would you like to be called? She tipped her head and scrunched her brow like it was a silly question. Kip? He let out a small breath. At least she was willing to talk. Still Kip? She nodded. Well, Kip, do you want to learn how to drive this thing? Her eyes lit with excitement, and she pushed herself off of the chair with a hop and joined him where he stood before the controls. He used his foot to nudge a crate closer to the console, which she promptly scrambled atop. He shifted next to her in case she should topple backwards and demonstrated turning a hand dial back and forth. The craft slid nominally left and right. Kip looked up at him, eyes wide. She tentatively reached her small hand toward the control. Go on, nice and slow, he encouraged. She tried to turn it with one hand, as he had, and frowned, its size making it hard for her to grip. Knox held back a grin as a determined expression settled over her minute features. She reached forward with both hands and gripped the dial. The craft shifted abruptly to the left. Kip pulled back as if burned and pressed her lips into a thin line. It's okay, he coached. I won't let us move from the path. Keep it smooth and slow. Kip listened to the instructions intently and reached once again for the wheel. This time, the vehicle strafed into a gentle slide to the right. Excellent, that's it. The corner of her mouth quirked into a half-grin as she carefully drove. Knox maintained the primary controls and adjusted as needed for the occasional strafing along with his turns. The road wound in slow, lazy bends to accommodate the incline towards Terran's father's property. Searle had always been a recluse and had built his house far up into the mountainside. The strange choice had been the subject of cluster gossip, but Knox guessed few were complaining now, except for Searle. Knox doubted he was taking the intrusion of the whole cluster with much grace. The road plateaued, and Knox halted the vehicle. Kip released her control and dusted her hands off, clearly proud of a job well done. The road ahead was clogged with what had to be every working vehicle left in Rickon. A few people milled between the craft, sorting supplies, and looked more purposeful than Knox would have expected. He spotted a boy from the cluster, waving him forward, pointing to a narrow path which forked off the road. Uncle Logan said to take this path up to the house. Knox eyed the overgrown road warily. Will we be able to get through? Yes, overseer. Knox nodded and eased the large craft forward. Kip reached once again for the controls. Better let me do this part, little one. She wrinkled her nose in disappointment, but leaned back from the dash obediently. You're an excellent co-pilot. She seemed to settle at his assessment and focused instead on the road ahead. The cleared path was narrow, but, true to the boy's word, Logan's team had removed any obstructions. The remaining brush pressed flat as they passed over it. Finally, they squeezed between two large cedars and entered the back edge of Searle's property. Knox let out a low whistle. The usually immaculate farmyard and cleared fields beyond were full of people. All of Rickon looked to be crammed here, with tents, lean-tos, and animals moving between them all. The sight made him think of the inhabitants of Beryl. They had likely started out in much the same way, desperation pushing them to find a new way to live. In the warm, mid-afternoon sun, Logan stood in the middle of a throng of people, shouting directions and gesturing in an exaggerated fashion. Several of the council members looked to be in intense discussions, talking down an irate Searle. The red of his face was visible even at this distance. The activity in the clearing stuttered to a halt at their entrance. Dedan, standing on the rustic balcony of the house, started moving toward them even as Knox powered the craft down. Logan barked a few last orders to a group waiting by the freshly painted barn before heading their direction. Was that Gort?" Logan asked, his broad face going slack at the sight of the bloody machinist. "It is. Maven has him stabilized, but she's going to need to get him to the house immediately." From behind him, Knox could already hear Maven directing people, dictating how he was to be transferred. "On it," Logan said, grabbing the arm of a young girl passing by. "Go find Lynn. Maven needs her at the main house now." "Yes, Foreman," she said, and ran off. Logan's face crumpled with a look of worry. "I shouldn't have left them behind." "It wasn't on you. He got away from me as well. Maven will do everything she can." "She doesn't lose very many." Logan started and then cut off, seeming to remember the last patient Maven had lost was Knox's child. The breath pressed from his lungs as the half-hidden grief tried to break through. Kip reached up for his hand. The warmth startled him from his dark thoughts, and he glanced down at the girl, struck again by her intuition. Logan wrung his thick hands. "The cluster? How did it fare?" Knox dropped his voice. "Not much left, I'm afraid." He scooped Kip from her crate and jumped from the craft and onto solid ground, next to Logan. "The Brekka made it through the barrier, and they are here." Knox looked past the small crowd converging on the craft to the dark lines of smoke smudged across the blue of the sky, his mouth pressing into a grimace. Logan's eyes narrowed, and his jaw set. "I thought as much." He glanced around at the onlookers' hungry expressions. "We need to talk. Privately." Council Ship, Logan's father, hobbled up, gruffly dismissing the crowd. "Go on, let the man breathe for a moment. We will gather as a cluster after the evening meal." When no one moved, he swung his walking staff in a feeble swing. "Go on." The slow-moving stick made contact with a few shins before the crowd began to drift back to their previous tasks. Gord was carried into the house. The image of his limp frame draped amongst the wreckage didn't inspire much confidence. If I had stopped him... Kip touched his cheek. He met her eyes and let his forehead rest against hers for a moment. "You're right. There will be time for all of that later." He set her back on the ground once again. She automatically gripped his hand and held it to her chest along with her rabbit. Logan flipped one of her small pigtails, earning him a mock scowl. "Good to see you found your shadow. He had us worried for a bit, eh, Kipper?" She chewed her lip, considered him for a moment, and then spoke. "I knowed he'd come." Logan's mouth dropped open in shock, and Knox couldn't keep from barking out a laugh. Kip giggled, grey eyes sparkling. "You're full of surprises, Kipper," Logan chuckled. Council Dossett slipped into their small circle. "Council Ship, Foreman Logan. We are about to meet in the barn." Her mouth twisted in distaste. "That is, if you are done twilling about. We have important things to discuss." Ship's eyes still crinkled at the edges with a smile, even enjoying the joke without full context. "I'll take joy when it can be found." Dossett huffed. "Well, when you are ready." She turned to leave, carefully avoiding Knox's eye. Logan almost followed, but stopped, noticing Knox rooted where he stood. "You inviting Overseer Knox as well, Council Dossett?" Dossett ran her tongue over her teeth as her eyes drifted over Knox. "No, The disavowed is not invited. He can wait until this evening's meeting, along with the rest of the cluster." Logan's back stiffened. "He single-handedly protected us today." "Protected?" the councilwoman sputtered. "We took the precautions he suggested," she sneered. "But now our cluster is destroyed, and here we are displaced." "Alive?" Council Ship pointed out in his thick drawl. She rolled her eyes. "No thanks to him. It was Logan and yourself that brought the cluster here safely." "Time you were given because of Overseer Knox," a loud voice boomed, pulling the eyes of those closest. "Who are you to deny the sky's representative?" The woman spun. Dedan stood a stone's throw from the group. "I couldn't help but overhear, Council Dossett, and it sounded as if you were dismissing our overseer." More eyes glanced their way. Some stopped their work to watch the confrontation. Noticing the attention, she hissed, "This is not a conversation for you. You are not even of Rickon anymore. I don't know why you even bothered to come back." Dedan glowered at her, eyebrows nearly touching one another. "To return your messenger, have you forgotten?" Grumbles erupted from those nearest, and Dossett stuttered. "He would have been fine on his own. Jai is a capable man." "Enough," Ship grumbled. "Today is not about titles or standing. Every one of us must use our skills and strength to protect this cluster and its people." "Fine. Come," Dossett bit out. "Dedan too," Knox said. "And me," Kip piped up. Dossett's eyes bulged. "Of course, Kipper too," Logan agreed. Not long after the confrontation, Knox and the others followed Dossett into the modestly sized barn. The space was perfectly organized, feed bins full and each piece of equipment stored in its place. A large space had been cleared in the center, with a small generator quietly powering a ring of stand lights. The other 8 members of the council were already gathered, sitting on makeshift stools. Terran's father, Searle, stood by one of the light stands and scowled as the group entered. "What's he doing here?" Thin arms crossed over a bony chest. His amber eyes were the only piece of Terran Knox saw in the man. Narrowed in disgust as they were now, the faint resemblance all but vanished. "Good to see you, Searle," Knox said. Searle ignored the greeting. "As disavowed, he's relinquished all rights to a voice in this meeting." "And what right do you have?" Logan challenged, stepping in front of Knox. Searle's face reddened, and he opened his mouth in retort, but Dossett spoke up. "Unlike the rest of you, Searle has been invited to join us. This is his land, and he deserves a say." She moved into the circle of lights, her mouth pinched in a sour expression. Searle leaned back against a thick wooden pillar, looking mollified. "Don't be a fool, Dossett. We need all the help we can get at the moment," Ship grumbled. "Says you," said Council Huger, his broad belly bouncing with the pronouncement. "This council does not need an overseer." Logan stiffened next to Knox, and Dedan let out a loud huff. "You're right, Council Huger," Knox spoke up, and all eyes turned on him. "I'm not here as your overseer. I make no such assumptions. My only thought is to prepare Rickon for what's ahead. Raiders pushed those beasts here. We are at war. We need—" "Foreman Logan already told us of the Tumultian threat. We've experienced firsthand the devastation of the Earthbound," Huger interrupted. "What do you think to tell us that we don't already know?" Knox frowned and stumbled over his next words. I thought this council would want a report of the raiders I faced only hours ago. They will return." Council Dossett gave him a patronizing smile. "You can report the details to the head of security and join their ranks if desired." Logan stepped forward, his shoulders stiff. "You want to use Knox as a watchman? If it wasn't for his intervention today, we would have all been crushed by that beast or slaughtered by raiders." "So says he," Searle mumbled. Logan leveled a withering glare in the older man's direction. "Since when has an overseer ever lied?" "We are not questioning Knox's integrity," Dossett interjected in a sickly sweet tone, "but rather suggesting how he can best serve the cluster. He is our overseer, Logan growled. Knox stepped forward, bringing himself next to Logan. It is my honor to protect and serve the cluster. A privilege you forfeited, another councilman said. A familiar flush of shame heated his face. The councilman continued. And it is clear you do not take such a calling seriously, coming back here as you have with a child in tow. Kip hugged close to his leg, sensing the focus of the room turning to her. He rested a hand on her thin shoulder in reassurance, shame giving way to the deeper heat of anger. Leave the child out of this, he warned. I offer you my service. No, you swore us your service, Huger said, his voice cold and sharp. Any response caught in Knox's throat. This was the heart of it, the rift between himself and the cluster. A broken vow. Logan spoke up. A vow he still honors? He looked between the council members while gesturing towards Knox. How can you not see that? Searle stepped forward, meeting his challenge. All we see is a failed investment. This cluster supplied his every need only for him to throw it back in our faces. Words failed. Logan was already in motion, meeting Searle with a quick step and driving his fist into the spindly man's jaw. He wobbled and collapsed onto his backside, dazed. Stunned silence held for a heartbeat before the council devolved into shouts of protest and accusations. Ship moved between his son and Searle, wooden staff pressed firmly to Logan's chest as he spoke in low, urgent tones. Logan's expression turned to stone, and he spun and strode from the circle. Knox lifted Kip into his arms and followed, leaving the council to fuss and fume on their own.